What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Chop and Brew. Today we're doing a little more brew than chop. I am Chip Walton.
I'm Don Osborn.
Dono, you know this guy from the interwebs, his homebrewing videos on YouTube and whatnot. So Don's got a special project that we've been putting off way too long and we're finally going to do today. What are we doing, Don, with this?
We are washing yeast. It's something that you can do. It's definitely a semi-advanced homebrew, process, but it is, as you will see, not all that difficult. And the advantage is you get to have a lot of yeast to use in your next batches. You can share yeast with people. I've done that. You also save a few dollars because you don't have to go buy new yeast every time.
That's right.
We're going to wash this yeast out of the primary, and hopefully at the end we'll end up with sort of a clean collection of yeast.
That's awesome. We're going to wash it in this washing machine, right?
Yes, we are. Rinse and repeat.
Yeah. No, we're gonna wash this elsewhere. So stick around. Yeast washing, a lot of people have requested it over the years, and we actually have a good reason for doing this time. We'll tell you more about that in a second. Chop and brew. Some kind of thing, some kind of graphic that says something. So Don, tell us really quickly kind of the basic steps of what we're about to do and see here.
The basic steps are you're going to have boiled about 1 gallon of water ahead of time, and then boil it for, say, 10 minutes, and then cool it down to room temperature. You don't want to kill the yeast, but you want the water to be boiled. We're going to dump the 1 gallon in here. We're going to swirl this up and get all of this stuff in suspension. And then we are going to let it settle for a period of time, maybe 10 to 15 minutes. What happens is, and this is why this is relatively easy, the bad stuff settles out first, settles to the bottom. The stuff you want stays floating on the top. So that allows you to pour out the stuff that you want and leave behind the stuff you don't want. This will be the first sort of washing step. We'll pour it into here, then we will let it settle in here, and then we will do another pour. So there's 2 stages where you're leaving behind things that you don't want. And so these pourings will go into pint jars or quart jars or even very clean, pickle jars, whatever you want, to save it in, and then you will just store it in your refrigerator until you're ready to use it.
So this was sent to us from our buddy Keith, who lives in Aurora, Colorado, and it was basically, he had cultured and built up the yeast dregs from a bottle of Russian River Sanctification.
Yeah, or several bottles.
Okay.
Possibly.
He basically built that up in his little mad science room, and he sent Don here one of those washes, and then Don built it up and busted it into 4 more jars for some of us. So this has become, like Don was saying, it's like sharing a culture. It's almost like sharing a sourdough bread starter. You know what I mean? Cool thing is, Keith has brewed with his and just gotten rid of it over the generations or whatever. He actually needs some back. So we want to make sure that this turns out really clean so we can hook Keith back up in Colorado with his own baby. So I personally brewed like a very light German, like a Belgian single, like super low gravity, super just pretty much Pilsner, Pilsen, DME and LME, kind of Potter's Beery, kind of exactly Potter's Beery, and I pitched that on it, and it's in a keg. Don brought his, which has been finished for months more than mine.
Well, the one I brought is actually was the source of you getting the collection. So it is probably a year and a half or so now, which is fine for a Brett-based beer to have around that long, and we can sample that.
And that's what's making this special. We should have pointed that out. There's ale yeast, Brett, bugs, who knows what kind of mysterious things are in there, but this isn't just like, we're not just washing like, 1056 in this case to save some money, which you can do, but we're kind of trying to keep something very special around, so let's get on it.
The first step is take your cooled water that you boiled earlier and pour it into your dregs, and you're pretty much required to spill some of it. I find that I spill. If I don't spill, then it probably won't work. So this is not going to work. Just kidding. All right, so one thing that we didn't mention is You can go ahead and rack as much beer out of there as you want. In fact, I would say rack all of the beer out of there and just use the water to be doing this washing. The next thing you got to do is swirl, and we might not get all of this on camera. We'll do an initial look. If you look on the bottom, it's coming off pretty well. I've had them where, I don't know if I just did a lager at home, and I just washed that yeast, and sometimes you have to swirl this up for quite some time.
Oh yeah.
So that's good. That was pretty easy. Now, the next thing you do is you're gonna wait. Now, somebody gave me a tip when I was doing this, that they said if you can, go ahead and set the carboy down on its side. And this is an extra big carboy that Chip has, but I just have a 6-gallon carboy, and I can put a 1 gallon of water in it and tip it over without it coming out. But if you had to, put something under it to have it like that, that would be fine. So I'm going to start my timer. We're going to let this sit for a while. We'll let you know how long it ends up being, but I would guess it'll be 10 to 15 minutes before we will pour out. What'll happen is it'll start to stratify, and then you pour out the stuff on the top, but we'll show you that. Okay, it's been 14 minutes. I thought it might be 15, but we're getting there now, and as you can see, right above my fingertip here, you can see a line that's pretty easy to see. So the stuff at my finger and below is the stuff that we want to leave behind. The stuff above is more of this milky liquid, and that's where most of the yeast is still in suspension. That's what we want to pour out. So we might let it go a little bit longer. The more this settles, the better it is for collecting it, but we are making progress. All right, it's been a half hour since we set this on its side. A quick note about why we put it on its side. Somebody gave me this tip. Since we're going to be pouring it out anyway, and the stuff on the top is what we want, it's easier to pour it if it's already on its side than if it was straight up. Because if it's straight up and you tilt it, then you're kind of rousing up some of the stuff that you were settling and trying to keep out of there. So if you're comfortable doing it this way, and it's not going to be coming out of here, it's nice to do it this way, but you can also just set it upright. I've done it that way too, and it will also work. So we are going to pour this out of here. My goal is to just kind of mostly fill this up. And even if I pour some of the bad stuff in here, we're still going to be letting it settle again, so it's not too critical. Can actually see that I'm still mostly pouring in stuff that's on the top, and the stuff I don't want, I can see it. It's kind of in front of my chest here. And I think I'm starting to get to that stuff kind of about now, but I'm up to about 1 gallon. So, yeah. Now we're going to let this settle for a period of time. And you can even tell the color, this stuff is the darker, more goopier stuff that you don't want, and this is lighter in color, so that's mostly the yeast.
Good job, dude. You got this thing. Here, I'll go in for a fist bump too. Okay, so now we're in our secondary
wash.
Right.
Second wash.
And how long might this take in times that you've done it? What's kind of the variance in time?
Well, this first one we ended up waiting a half hour today, and I've waited as little as 15 minutes maybe. It just kind of depends. Different yeasts, I think, settle out better. I should say different sediment. I mean, whatever the sediments are in there.
Could be highly hopped beer. It could have been lowly hopped beer. It might have a lot of proteins or weirdness.
Exactly, and it also depends on your process. I actually don't filter out too much stuff going into my primary, so I might have a different experience than somebody that does. So anyway, this one was a half hour today. That could be 15 minutes. This one I also have seen take 20 minutes to a half hour. This one seems to take longer. However, I recently did one, and I did a lager, and I don't know if that made it any different, but it actually, I probably waited an hour and a half. before I felt like I had the level of settling that I was happy with before I wanted to pour it off into my final collection containers.
Okay.
So we will keep an eye on this, but like I said, this could take an hour. It could take more. It's a good chance to clean out your primary and have a drink and contemplate your next move.
Yeah, and what we are drinking here is this. Don brought this over. This is along the line of lineage, of parentage of what you're seeing here. This is a beer that he brewed with the first stuff we got from Keith. And then that became a second one, which is what I pitched. So this is a third generation.
This will be the, well, I don't know. Keith was 1, 2, 3, 4th, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah. This
It's
will
awesome.
be the 4th.
And
which it brings up a good point.
Mm-hmm.
There's probably a point beyond which you don't want to keep doing this.
Right.
I personally really just do it the one time. So I buy a batch of yeast, make a starter, make a beer, then I'll wash it, and I'll collect it in 2 or 3 jars, and then I'll use those for additional batches. But then I won't wash those, at that point. I mean, you could, but I also like to use different kinds of yeast. I almost always tend to think in terms of kind of like back-to-back batches. Mm-hmm. So now that it's winter, I made a Helles. I'm going to be making a Pilsner. I wash the yeast from the Helles. I'll make a Pilsner with one of those, and I might make like a IPA with a lager yeast or something like that. IPL, if you will.
IPAL.
But you can store it. People ask me, how long can you store it in the fridge? I've probably stored it a maximum of 3 months or so, and then made a starter, and it's been okay. You could maybe go longer. Maybe for some people that's maybe they would not want to go that long.
So yeah, this beer is we tasted mine, which is only a couple of days on gas, and that's because I let it sit in this primary vessel for almost 9 months. Just kept forgetting about it. Mine was a little, I feel, just like the barnyard funk and the bread of the Pilsen. And that's kind of, yours is definitely a little more complex, getting a little more like perfumey.
I think it's older, and I think the Brett that is in there has had more time to do what Brett does over the months, and it's a little bit peppery and spicy and dry, and but otherwise, kind of clean tasting. It's not sour or tart. It has been about an hour that we have been leaving this 1 gallon jug sit. Now, to be honest, the amount of sediment that is at the bottom, which is only about a centimeter, that was there after about 15 minutes. But we have let it sit longer, thinking that maybe more would settle, or it might change how it looks, and just sort of give us a different option of pouring stuff off. But I think that we have what we're gonna get, so we are just gonna pour it out. We have a little stuff floating on the top, which I'm not really sure about. I don't think we need it, and I kind of would like to not have it. So I'm gonna pour, and if it will pour out, I'll just pour it out into an extra glass. If it is just gonna kind of get all mixed in, then we'll just take it. These jars and these lids have all been sanitized, so don't forget that. All right, so here we go. Cheers. So yeah, that's just kind of, see, that stuff is just getting all mixed in, so there's really, I can't easily pour it off. I think it's just gonna have to be what it will be. We got it. Trained professionals. We have the caps on. I don't crank them down. In theory, they could still maybe be kicking off a little bit of gas. Lightly snug. I just kind of do it so the ring is there. Basically, you don't want stuff getting in there. And obviously, nothing's going to be falling in there when it's tight like that, or when it's sealed like that. Now you just put them into your fridge and let them sit until you need them. This fridge is going to be about 45 degrees, whatever your beer fridge temp, or even just your normal food fridge will work just fine. And It seems to take 3 or 4 days before you notice the yeast settling at the bottom, and we'll have to take a look and see how it looks after a few more days.
We're checking in with these 2 jars. This is about 12 hours after Don poured them into jars. They've been sitting in the beer cooler at about 44, 45 degrees, kind of forcing it to settle out a little bit. And you can see it's obviously clear there. It was much clearer when I got it out. It's already kind of started kicking up, just sitting out here and being moved around a little bit. But there is this layer. You can see it starting to settle really well there. Kind of a lighter colored sediment. That is our happy yeast slowly making kind of a thicker concreted, compacted layer at the bottom. So we're just going to let these sit out for, like you said, a couple of days, let them do their thing. See if we can't get this to be pretty much clear, really clear, with just this, 1 finger width of yeast at the very bottom. Back in the fridge with our jug that we're kind of doing the experiment on to see what happens with a lot of time built into the process. You can see this layer of sediment has now started to actually form kind of like 2 layers. We've got this greenish gray layer that is all the dregs and the funk that we never wanted to include anyway. And now our yeast is actually settling into this super fine kind of whitish tan layer. So at this point, it would be hard to get that yeast off the dregs anyway. We'd have to swirl this whole thing up and kind of start from scratch. I don't plan on using this. I just wanted to show, kind of display that if you overdo it with cold crashing or if you overdo it with time, you might actually get everything back together and defeat the purpose of what we were trying to do anyway. Back down here in the dungeon, the jars that have been sitting in the cooler, again, noticeably more clear liquid starting to happen, cloudy layer, and then at the bottom you can see a much thicker layer of yeast building up. So this looks like it's working out pretty good. I'm pretty excited about this. Actually, another real quick shot here from the bottom. You can see it's totally caked, the bottom of the jar, and is a nice maybe like 1/3 inch layer there. So man, this is working out pretty good. Just taking a little time, but patience will pay off. Day 3, January 16th. Chip Walton's birthday. Go Capricorns. And you can see that we're getting even closer to the end goal here. Pretty much all clear-ish. There's just a small layer of cloudiness at the bottom. And here is a look at the bottom. We're getting a super awesome layer of yeast building there. It's getting thicker every day. It's getting nice and lovely. There's the other jar. Once it focuses, there it is. Boom. Looking really good. So I'm really happy with this. Give it a couple more days. Let it continue to settle. And then I'm going to package one up to send to Keith and hopefully use one. Again, for reference, here's the bottom of the jar at the end of day 3. Looking really good. Okay, so I accidentally skipped a day. It is now day 5. We washed this last Sunday. It is now Friday, and you can see it's pretty much dropped out completely from solution into this very small layer at the bottom. Here's a closer up look. It's completely compact, very nice and tidy. Looking good. Very happy about this. Like Don said, at this point we can just put it back in the fridge and let it stay dormant until we're ready to build up a starter and pitch it into some beer. Check it out. Almost 2 months to the day from wash date. Things are looking really pretty with these bad boys.
Pull back.
Cheers. So our yeast experiment or our yeast washing session, compliments of Don Osborn, look pretty damn good, man. We're gonna
It works.
We got 4 jars. We're gonna send 1 to our buddy Keith in the Denver area. Mm-hmm. Someone else I met in the last couple of weeks with the Northeast Brewers Alliance claimed 1 of the other ones. I'm gonna keep 1. And
how many do you have? 4?
You wanted 1? Yeah, I don't know, maybe Dawson? I can't remember. They're spoken for, even though nobody's claimed them yet.
Put one on eBay. Just kidding.
So yeah, what comes around goes around. Dono gave us some yeast. I'm giving him some back. Keith gave us some yeast. We're giving him some back. It's the beauty of the sharing community of homebrewers.
It's friendship beer.
When it comes time to want to brew with this, just dump this stuff off.
You can do a couple of things. I don't remember how much we talked about it, but I usually do make a starter. I definitely do dump off the vast majority of this, you need a little bit in there to help you swirl up the yeast that's on the bottom. It will be fairly stuck on the bottom, I've found.
Yeah.
That sits in the fridge for a month or so. But I usually make a starter. I've done it where I don't make a starter and I just pour the yeast that's been sitting in my fridge right into my brand new wort, and I've noticed that it does take longer to get going.
Yeah.
The starter definitely helps it, much shorter lag time, and so if you're into making starters anyway, even though you have more than enough yeast, it definitely reawakens the yeast and gets them going.
So yeah, let us know if you have other ways of yeast washing and yeast archiving. Drop a comment or a note to either the email chopandbrew@gmail.com or the plethora of social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter,
The YouTubes.
Wherever there's a blank space, tell us about what you got going on. Thanks for watching another episode of Chop and Brew. We're going to do a quick tasting note for a little lanyard video that I'll link underneath this official episode. This is a bourbon barrel-aged Imperial Porter, compliments of Sandro Chiavaro. I knew it was going to take me a second the first time. Chiavaro. So we're going to get on this.
Stay tuned.
Get on that. Chop for chop.
Brew for brew.
Woo! Yeast washers! I'm not sure if this is going to be episode 1. I was going to hey, episode 1, thanks for doing this, but we'll just act like it's already a thing.
Yeah.
This ain't nothing new. Okay.
Today on Chop and Brew. I mean, look at my videos.
You would know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the king of kind of ghetto style.
I'm all in the f***ing dark, you're all in the light. Home brewing! You can see Don Osborn's hair's grown out a little more. Mine.
It'll be cut off.
Mine has too.
That's okay. You just gotta think harder.
I know. Wouldn't it suck if I hadn't been recording that?
I guess.
Some kind of thing, some kind of graphic that says something.